Hello children. Once again I am in front of you people to talk about the topic reproduction. Till now you have studied different life processes like nutrition, respiration, circulation, excretion. But today we are going to talk about reproduction. Name of the chapter is How do organisms reproduce? Means we have to know the mechanism of reproduction. But before going to that answer, let us first know that why reproduction is, why we reproduce, why the organism reproduce. Organisms reproduce to continue their generation so that the continuity of the species is maintained. Now, you have studied that nutrition, respiration, circulation, excretion, they are essential. Without that, life cannot survive. It is very essential. Any one of them, if it is missing in one individual, the organism will not survive. But in case of reproduction, it is not an essential process, but important. It is important. Why? Because through reproduction, the species can continue. Today we are able to see different organisms around us, and the same organisms were seen by our grandparents. And many generations back also, they have also seen. How today we are able to see them? Because they have reproduced. That is why reproduction is very important, although it is not an essential for any organism. But for a population, reproduction is important so that the continuity of that species is maintained. Now, when we are talking about this important, let us now see that how this reproduction is carried out. Are two organisms similar to each other? You will say yes. Like all the dogs you see in your surrounding or in your house, they look similar. Ants, if you see, they all look similar. We human beings also look similar. So how it is possible that we all are looking similar? There must be some reason, and that is the blueprint. The blueprint from where the organisms are increasing. Because of this blueprint, we are having the similarity. The organisms which reproduce are similar to their parents because there is a blueprint, and that is the DNA. You all have studied in class 9th that the DNA is present in the chromosome which carry the information. They carry the information from one generation to other generation. So that DNA have that information that transfers the information to the next generation, and that is why we look similar with our parents. Now actually what happens? The DNA during cell division, the DNA they replicate. In fact, the DNA replicate before the cell divides. So the DNA, which are the information for the production of protein, they make copies. They divide and make copy and pass the information for the next protein formation. And that is the place where the characters are transferred. And now the new copy which has formed, it will not alone survive. It needs the other cellular content. the cell which is having the DNA chromosome, when it is dividing, some of the cell content they are taken by the DNA, which is the parent one. But what about the new? So along with the division of the DNA, replication of the DNA, even the cell other content, other organelles, they also divide. And the other DNA, which is the copy of the parent DNA, that also get those other cell apparatus. And then they form two identical cells. So that is the mechanism of cell division. Now, create exact copy. And this is the reason why the offsprings look similar to their parents. Because the DNA, it is replicating and copying. So how, I hope you have understood now that how the cells are creating the exact copy. It is the DNA which replicates and forms the new DNA where the informations are transferred. But you know, children, that the DNA which is dividing, the informations which are transferred, they are in the form of chemical reactions. And we know no chemical reaction is reliable. There can be some mistake, because during the copying of DNA, hundreds of chemical reactions are going on. Out of them, some of the reactions may be having some variation. So, a little bit of difference in the information transfer can lead to a variation. And because of that variation, we find the new individual formed have some different characteristics. Although they look similar, but subtly they are little different, which is not noticeable. Sometimes it is not noticeable. Physically you will see that yes, he is having a nose, eye, legs, and all the body parts. Even the internal organs may be similar. But you can see that the hair are not similar. Like, I am tall. My mother was tall. But my mother had curly hair. My hairs are not curly. So there is little bit variation. So that variation is because of the DNA copying. So while the DNA copying, the variation is there, and because of this variation we see the particular individual is different from another one. Although from a distance you can find that yes, all are human beings, but if you see closely you will find little bit of differences, isn't it? So that is variation. Now, are the cells identical? The cells which are formed, the new cells during the cell division, you know, whether it is mitosis or meiosis, the cell divide. In mitosis the cell divides into 2, and in meiosis the parent cell divides into 4. So the new cells which are formed, are they identical? They are identical, but there may be some variation, with little bit of variation in them. So cells are identical but with a bit of variation, which is subnuclear variation. There is a very unnoticeable variation. You cannot notice it immediately. So that variation is seen. Now coming to the importance. Now the variation which comes, is it beneficial to the population, or is it important? It is beneficial to the individual organism. For an individual organism, the variation may not be successful. Sometimes the variation is very drastic. The variation has taken place in the DNA so drastically that the new protein which are formed, that is not able to adjust with the other cell organelles, and as a result the cell dies. That is called mutation. Sometimes The mutation occurs where the cell is not able to survive, and sometimes it is able to survive also. But so in case of individual person, the variation may not be successful. But in a population, variation is very successful. Now let us see the importance of variation. When there is, because we know whenever the cell is dividing, there will be a little bit of variation which may not be noticeable every time, but these variation keeps on accumulating. Now let us see what are the importance which we see due to variation. Like pre-adaptation. We know, children, that the earth, when it was formed in the solar system, that time the earth environment was something else. If you compare it with today's environment, that time it was full of water, surrounded by clouds, and in that the living organism, bacteria came. Isn't it? But now we find so many varieties. From those bacteria we are getting, today we know lakhs of species in plants as well as in animals. So from where they have come? It is because of the accumulation of the variations. And that is the evolution. You will study in your next chapter in heredity and evolution. That how these variation they have accumulated and form new species. So variation is important because it helps in producing new species. Pre-adaptation. Like we know that the environment changes. Sometimes it is global warming. Because of global warming, the environment is changing. Maybe due to flood, or sometimes there is a drought. It may be any reason. Severe cold, and the nice where these individuals, the population living, may not be able to adjust to that changing environment and will die. But if there is a variation and are able to adjust with the changing environment, they will survive. So that adaptation, that change which has been brought in their cells, in the DNA, help them to survive. So that is the adaptation. The adaptation which comes in the individual is because of the variations which are in DNA. Next is struggle for existence. There is a competition of food, space for all organisms. So those who are having that resistance, and that resistance comes from the variation. So because of that resistance power, some are able to struggle with the crisis and are surviving. So variation helps for survival, for the existence. Individuality. Organisms, we can see that you may be different from your brother. You may be looking different from your mother or father. Although you are the child of your parents, but there may be some difference. Maybe in the complexion, maybe in your hairstyle, or maybe your eyeballs. There may be some differences. So that makes you different. You are different from your brother. In appearance also must be. So that difference in your appearance is because of that variation. So variation has an importance, and because of this variation we are still surviving. Maybe because of this variation, the new in coming generation we will be able to survive in space also, if there is a variation in our body, if that variation is in our genes. So we will be able to, perhaps we never know, we are searching for the life in other planets. You know that in other planets there are no atmosphere or no water. But if variations arises in our body, maybe in few generations you will see that we are surviving in other planets also. So that is the importance of variation. So I hope you have understood that we have not discussed about how do organisms reproduce, but we have taken the concepts which are the cause, that why it is reproducing, why the organism is reproducing. It is for the continuity of the species, and that continuity of the species helps to survive. Otherwise today there would not have been any life. If the organism doesn't reproduce, will you see any life on the earth? No. So I think you have understood that why the organisms are reproducing, and it is an important process for the survival of the organisms. And we have now known that the exact copy makes the individual look similar to their parents, and that is because the characters are present in the DNA which are being transferred. And these DNA, when they divide, the cells look identical because the characters are equally distributed. And when the distribution is, because they are all the chemical reactions, during chemical reactions there may be some mistake, because no chemical reaction is very much reliable. So because of that there may be some variation, and that variation is very important. Okay children, thank you very much. Goodbye.